Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Gwendolyn, the Spirited Bride. Chapter 1. She hollered at the top of her lungs, her hands tight around the reins as her heels kicked into Bonnie's flanks. The chestnut mare snorted and went faster, the wind whipping Gwendolyn's black hair against her fair face, her cheeks red from hours on the plain herding her father's cattle. "You'll not beat me this time." Jasper yelled from her right, but she didn't respond. He talked too much. What were words when action was needed? If he wanted to beat her, he'd need more than the flapping of his lips, he'd need better riding skills than he had. Which was why she was going to win. The ranch was 2 miles away, and her eyes were fixed on the horizon. "You've got to keep your eye on the prize," her father always told her, and on God and what was ahead. Her father was a wise man, knowledgeable about many things. She loved him more than anyone. Gwendolyn leaned forward, keeping her head low near Bonnie's neck as the horse ran faster. The sound of hoof beats was the most pleasant sound Gwen ever heard. They echoed the pounding of her heart. How could she give this up to sit at some man's table and raise his children and clean his boots? How could she give up the very essence of her being to become someone she had no idea how to be? She gritted her teeth and pressed Bonnie harder. The horse, as if aware of her mistress's need to release her frustration, found speed from somewhere, and soon the house and the outer buildings of the ranch became clear, even though the stinging wind whipped against Gwendolyn's eyes. She never took her focus away, not until Bonnie's hooves slid to a stop at the corral. She promptly jumped from her saddle and turned to await Jasper's arrival. A few moments later, his horse came bounding up. "Pay up," she demanded unceremoniously, her hand outstretched for her prize. The scruffy man smiled, showing a row of slightly twisted teeth. "You ain't even giving me a chance for a rematch," he countered. This was a rematch. "You owe me double," she stated. Her hand remained open as she stepped to his side. Jasper rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out a small satchel. Gwen could hear its contents jingle the moment he retrieved it. "How much?" 40 cents. He hissed. "You're going to bankrupt me, Gwenny." "Not if you don't stop betting on races you can't win," a voice called from behind them. "Daddy." Gwen reached up and snatched her winnings from Jasper's hand and ran to her father, throwing her arms around his neck. "You're back." Finley Parker was a man just shy of 6 feet tall, yet still, his daughter stood nose to nose with him as she greeted him. "I arrived this morning. I was expectin' to find you in the house preparing for my return," he chided her gently. "Sorry about that, but Cooper and Biggs had an accident in town and were laid up. I couldn't let Jasper go out there on his own with Nelson. They'd kill each other without supervision." She turned and gave Jasper a smirk. "It's true, boss. You know me and Nelson can't see eye to eye. We'd get to quarreling and the herd would get an extra chance to graze. Gwenny was just doing her duty to keep things in order." Findley chuckled. "I can see where your allegiance lies, Jasper. Go tell the boys I'm back, then go get your supper. I need to speak to my daughter." Jasper nodded toward Findley, then gave Gwen a smile before dismounting and leading his horse toward the barn. "What do you want to talk about?" Gwen asked as she hooked her arm in his and turned toward the house. "Not yet. Let's take a walk first," he instructed as he turned her away from the house and toward the field. They walked in silence, something not uncommon for them. Since she was a child, Gwen had loved taking long walks with her father. The two were such a pair that words were often useless to convey what they were feeling. They knew each other too well. "What's troublin' you?" she asked after a long while. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Her father remained silent, then exhaled a long breath. He stopped and turned toward her. "Some said that I was wrong not to marry after your mother passed," he started, and immediately Gwen knew where the conversation was headed. Don't do that. You raised me right. It doesn't matter what anyone says. You did your best, and I'm the woman I am because of it. That's the problem. His answer took her by surprise. What do you mean? She could feel the wrinkling between her brows. Her father had never questioned who she'd grown to be. Yes, she wasn't as ladylike as others in their town, but he'd never been ashamed of that or questioned her in the slightest. Why now? He held her face in his hands. In turn, she grasped his wrists as confusion decorated her face. Tell me. It's time for a change, Gwen. Her concern grew. What kind of change? The kind that comes with necessity. I'm no longer a young man, and this ranch needs someone to take care of it. I can take care of it, she countered. Don't talk like that. She stepped away from him. I won't listen to you talk like that. Gwen had never known her mother. Lucille Parker had died 3 days after Gwen was born. Her father had never remarried, though there were women who had tried to become the next Mrs. Parker. However, her father's heart belonged to the one he'd lost. There was no one else who could ever fill it. Instead, he'd focused his attention on his ranch and his daughter. He'd raised her alone with no woman to aid him, and because of it, Gwen was as rough and rugged as any man, plus as adventurous and savvy as any son could be. If she'd been a boy, her father would be more than proud, but now at the age of 22, she seemed doomed to spinsterhood. It was a fact that bothered him more than it did her. Gwen was happy to walk her life alone rather than give up who she was just to be what others told her she should be. Gwen, her father said firmly. You have to listen to me. Her hazel eyes met his. They were so much alike. Why did that have to be a bad thing? If she'd been a son, it wouldn't have mattered. Why was the fact that she was a woman mean that all of him and her became something wrong and inappropriate? I've tried to keep this from you for a long time, but there's no more time. His words made her wary. Why was he speaking in such a way? Keep what from me? She asked hesitantly. Her father stepped toward her. You need to find a husband. Daddy. Listen to me. I'm sick, Gwen. I've been sick a long time, but now the doctor says I can't keep up life as I know it. Things have to change, for me and for you. What's wrong? He shuffled his foot in the dirt. I been keepin' it from you the best I could. Not cuffin' in your presence. Not spitting in my kerchief when you was watching. He gave her an apologetic look. It's consumption. The word was like a punch, knocking the wind from her lungs. It couldn't be. He looked fine. It was impossible. A death sentence. He couldn't have consumption. She shook her head. No. It ain't true. You can't. But I do. God knows I wish I didn't, but it's confirmed. The trip I took was to see a doctor who specializes in this sort of thing. He says there's no doubt. Daddy, she started but couldn't find the words to continue as her heart broke open. She stepped forward and clung to him as if sheer will could reverse the dark news he'd just delivered. I need to make sure you're safe and happy before I leave this earth, he whispered into her hair as she wept. I'm going to find a place for you. I promise. Chapter 2. The months rolled by so quickly. Too quickly. Gwen watched as the man she loved, the one she'd built her entire world around, wasted away before her eyes. The ranch became unkempt, the hands were afraid of catching the virus and soon abandoned the place for safer work. Only Jasper remained. He'd had a sister die of the disease, and he knew what it was to watch someone you love die. He chose not to leave Gwen alone to deal with it. There was a lot of work but not enough hands, far more than one man could handle. Before, Gwen would have gladly gotten on her horse to herd beside him, but now, her duties were inside at her father's side. She was forced to sell off some of the cattle. Soon, there was hardly anything left. Gwen, her father called from his bed. Coming, Daddy, she answered as she rushed to his side. He was sweating profusely, something that had become too common as his illness had progressed. That wasn't the worst part, though. The coughing had grown more frequent and violent. No longer was it white mucus, but now the white was more often tinted with red than anything else. Jasper said it was a sign that his time with her was coming to an end, but Gwen refused to accept it. She prayed night and day for a miracle. She believed she'd get it if she just had faith. God would spare him. "I'm here," she said as she sat beside him on the bed. She immediately reached for the cloth to wipe his brow and face, but he pushed her hands away gently. "Don't worry about that," he said hoarsely before another spell of coughing gripped him. Gwen took the cloth that had been for his brow and brought it to his mouth. Once he settled, she pulled it away. A red smear met her eyes, and her heart sank as she dropped the cloth into a basin. "It's all right," her father assured her and took her hand. "I need you to do something for me, Gwenny," he said through shallow breaths. "Anything," she whispered as she patted his pale knuckles. "Usually, it's a father's duty to find his daughter a husband suitable for her, but I'm afraid I'm not up to it. Even if I was, given my condition, I doubt any man would come within a mile of this place, except Jasper." It was true. Since word had spread that her father had tuberculosis, people gave her a wide berth when she came to town, and no one but the doctor came out to visit. No man was coming to claim her hand, not that she was concerned. Her only thought was for her father, not herself. "Daddy, you don't need to worry about anything. I'll be just fine." "You're going to get better," she insisted. "Gwenny, I'm dying." "No," she said firmly as she fought the tears that stung her eyes. "I know you don't want to accept it, sweetheart, but I've made peace with God on this." Anger she didn't know she harbored suddenly rose up within her. "You can't do that. You can't just accept this, Daddy. You always told me God answers prayer. How can He heal you if you accept death?" The look in her father's eyes was gentle and sad. "I accept His will." "It is not His will that any should perish," she argued. "No, it ain't, but we all must die just the same. It was His judgment for Adam's sin, and it hasn't changed. Our lives on this earth must come to an end, and my end is coming quickly. I want to be sure of your future before I go." Gwen wanted to protest, but she couldn't. The look in her father's eyes quelled the fire inside her that told her to fight. "No one's going to marry me, Daddy. I'm no lady. The boys may have loved me like a daughter or a sister, but none of them want to marry a woman who can ride better than they can or shoot better." Her father squeezed her hand. "There's bound to be someone out there who can see your worth. There are more men in Texas than those in this town. There are even more in the world. I'm sure the right one will find you if you just look." "How? Where?" Her father's hand moved under the sheets on the far side of the bed. A moment later, he pulled out the newspaper she'd bought for him days before. He hardly had the energy to read, but he insisted on knowing what was going on, even if it took him forever to get through one article. "What's this?" she asked as she took the paper from him and began to read. There were advertisements, a page full of them, of men and women writing looking for a spouse. She raised skeptical eyes to her father. "There's more than one way to meet someone. This way you can say who you are and what you're like, and then the right man will answer you. You don't even have to go meet them. You just write." "I can't do this. How can I put myself out there for the world? They'd likely ridicule me." She folded the paper and set it aside. "Besides, there's no guarantee anyone would even answer." Weak as he was, her father raised a hand to her face and cupped her cheek. "You just be you. The right man will see something all the others can't." She shook her head. "I don't want to." "You must. When I'm gone, there isn't going to be anything left for you here, and you're too good a woman to be left alone all your life. Please, Gwen, do it for me. I won't rest easy if I don't know you're somewhere safe and happy." Gwen didn't want to do this. It was hard enough to be rejected by the few she did look on with appreciation. She couldn't imagine putting an ad in a newspaper for the entire country to see. Rejection by a nation was far worse than that of those in her small corner of Texas. However, she couldn't say no. If this was what her father wanted, she would at least try. She'd endure the embarrassment of having to resort to such a method to find a spouse, and she'd keep trying until there was no longer a need. She'd do it for him. She'd obey him as she always had and trust his judgment, even if she couldn't understand his reasoning. "I'll do it for you," she murmured as she sniffled. "But I do it under protest," she added. Her father smiled. "Your feelings are noted. I wouldn't expect you to do anything without voicing her opinion," he said with a small, strangled-sounding laugh which stilled as his gaze lingered on her face. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'll go fix you some lunch," Gwen answered. She slowly extricated herself from his grasp and left the room to prepare her father's meal. The sound of another round of coughing followed her. Every fiber of her body wanted to wail, but she couldn't. Instead, she steadied herself on the back of the dining room chair and gripped it tightly as she reined in her faltering strength. She had to be strong for him. She couldn't let him see how weak she felt. How frightened. Once her father was gone, she'd have no one, and a life alone would be more terrifying than anything she could imagine. Chapter 3. He didn't know why he was looking at the stupid thing again, but there he was reading the same advertisement for the 10th time in a matter of days. Usually, James Barber ignored such things, or read them for amusement, lamenting the folly of someone who'd write for a bride. His opinion on the matter had only grown stronger after his brother Hamilton had gone through his unfortunate incident, though there had been a silver lining in that. Their younger brother Simeon had found love for the first time in his life, and now the woman who had been meant to be one brother's wife was the wife of the other. James couldn't help but smile at the turn of events which had led to Simeon's happiness, even though it had caused division in their family. "Don't you have work to get to?" Hamilton bellowed across the room. His older brother's mood had grown steadily fouler ever since Simeon had left with his new bride. The two brothers had scarcely seen or spoken to one another since Hialeah had become Simeon's wife. It was a fact that pained James. Brothers weren't supposed to be like this, and in truth, they never would have needed to be if Hamilton could have swayed his prejudices enough to see the good in the woman James happily called his sister-in-law. Hialeah was a good woman, and in the years since becoming part of their family, she'd done nothing but prove the type of person she was, even if Hamilton refused to see it. "You're chipper," James commented as he gave Hamilton a sidelong glance. "No, I'm focused." "You should be, too. We've got a lot to do today, and you're over there reading as if it's Sunday morning." Hamilton's moods didn't faze him. As the middle child, James had long ago learned when to hold his tongue, which was often. Arguing with Hamilton was useless. He was the older brother who believed himself the father of them all, but it couldn't be helped. Hamilton had been given the responsibility of raising them on his own after their parents' deaths, and because of it, he thought his word was law. Which, of course, it had been back then when they were children. But didn't Hamilton realize that they were no longer boys, but men? Simeon had proven it, and his seeming rebellion didn't sit well. James knew that Hamilton secretly hoped their brother's marriage would fail and that somehow he'd be proven right, and Simeon would have to come home and see reason. Well, Hamilton was going to be sadly disappointed, but he'd learn that in time. It wasn't James's job to convince him. James gave the advert one last look before folding the paper and getting to his feet. He stalked across the room and out the door without a word. He could hear Hamilton behind him. "I hate when you do that," Hamilton stated as he caught up to him. "What?" "That. The whole silent, I don't have to speak, thing." "Okay," James responded, a small smirk tugging at the left corner of his mouth. "Stop that." "What?" he continued, knowing full well it would only frustrate his brother. James took little pleasures in life. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He didn't chase women. He didn't argue, and he never got into other people's affairs. He'd never been married, and had never seen the outside of Hidden Creek, Colorado. Teasing Hamilton was one guilty pleasure, and he indulged it as often as he could. "You planning on joining me and the boys in town this evening?" Hamilton asked as he adjusted his gun belt. James sighed. "You know I hate those things." "You hate meeting pretty eligible women?" James stopped in his tracks. "They may be eligible, but there's nothing interesting about them. Those women are all the same. It's like talking to a seamstress dummy. They never have anything new to say. It's always the weather. The fine night we're having, and whether I'd like to take a turn on the dance floor. I'd have more fun at home shining my boots. Hamilton scoffed. That, my brother, is the perfect description of your life. He laughed and walked away. What's that supposed to mean? James countered, following him. I mean, you talk about those women, but you're hardly interesting yourself. You stay home every day. You don't have many friends, and you don't seem to see anything wrong with it. I prefer not to waste my time trying to be something I'm not, James defended himself, growing annoyed. Well, you aren't exactly trying to make anything new happen either. You're happy to sit and shine your boots every day or check on the cattle. I have never seen you do anything unpredictable in your life. Hamilton continued to laugh. That's what I love about you, James. I can always count on you to do exactly what I know you will. Always have. Always will. Hamilton's words struck a nerve, and James had no answer for him. He watched as his brother stalked toward the barn to get his horse, leaving him standing where he'd stopped. James had never heard his life described in such a way before. He'd never considered how others saw him. It was never anything that bothered him because he was happy to be just who he was. Until that moment. Hearing Hamilton's censure caused something unexpected. It made James look at his life through another's eyes, and what he saw was nothing to smile about. What Hamilton had said was true. James was 32 and had never done anything out of character in his entire life. He wasn't like Hamilton, who was always the first at everything. He was happy to stand by his side and help him in his endeavors. He'd done it his entire life. Even when he didn't agree with his brother's views, he never abandoned him. Years before, Hamilton had given up a lot to take responsibility for them, and that was something James respected more than anything. It was why he never challenged his brother's decisions and why he stayed out of the disputes with Simeon, who had more free spirit than any of them. James was the peacemaker, but it also meant he was the one who never took sides, the one who was always level and centered. The one who was overlooked, whose opinion didn't matter because it would always be the same. That had to change. Hamilton emerged from the barn with both their horses in hand. He looked at him. What are you waiting for? Winter. What was he waiting for? Then James did the most unexpected thing. He turned around and marched back into the house. He could hear Hamilton calling after him, but he didn't turn around. I got something I need to do. I'll meet you out there, he yelled. James hurried to the table where he'd left the newspaper minutes before, and grabbed it before running up to his room and slamming the door. Hamilton thought he was predictable. That he was boring and his life was monotonous. He'd show him. He'd do something no one would expect. He'd show them that there was more to James Barber that met the eye. He got a piece of paper and a pencil and began to write. There was a reason that one particular ad had caught his attention. The woman described in those few lines was something James had never encountered in all his years living in Hidden Creek. She was adventurous, spirited, and by the words she used to describe herself, a very direct and honest person. Just the kind of thing James needed in his life, a dose of fire. Maybe nothing would come of it, maybe he'd only get the pleasure of saying he'd done something unexpected, that he'd stepped out of his comfort for a change. Who knew? Only God directed the steps. All he was doing was choosing the path. Chapter 4. He wants to meet me, Gwen divulged as she continued to read the letter. Her father lay still, his eyes barely open as he listened, a small smile on his face. Gwen's eyes grew wide as she read the final lines. He wants to marry me. It had been months since she'd received the first letter from James. Initially, she'd thought his letter a joke, a way to make fun of her, but her father had insisted she reply and so she had. Since then, there had been many letters, each one more intriguing and more revealing than the one before. James didn't mind her somewhat wild nature. He seemed completely enamored of her stories of life on the ranch. He even challenged her to a race when they eventually met. I told you, her father murmured. I told you that there would be a man who'd see your worth. He coughed weakly. What should I say? She asked, looking at her father for direction. What do you want to say? He answered. This isn't my choice to make now. You have to take this step on your own. You like him. I can see that. But do you like him enough to love him? She didn't know the answer. James seemed wonderful, but how could she think of leaving her father now when he needed her so much? How could she think of marriage when her father was dying before her eyes? I can't. Sadly, she folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Why not? Her father questioned. Am I wrong in thinking you like the man? No, you're right. Still, I can't, she answered as she stood and turned away from his bed. She didn't want him to see the look on her face. James Barber was the first man who'd ever wanted to take her hand. She would live with that knowledge. It would be enough to know that someone wanted her, even if she couldn't accept him. Don't make choices for forever, based on current circumstances, her father said. I know you don't want to leave me, but I'm already gone. I'm just waiting for you. She turned. What did you mean? I've only kept going for you, but I'm tired, Gwenny. My body is tired and so is my spirit. I told you I couldn't rest not knowing you would be looked after, he rasped. The opportunity is there, but I can't make you take it. I can't make you choose to live once I'm gone, and that's what I'm afraid of. That you'll stop living. That you'll resign yourself to whatever may happen, and stop choosing the path you want to follow. He paused and his breathing grew rough before it settled again. He continued, You've always marched to your own rhythm, boldly, like Queen Esther in the Bible. She faced death and still did what she knew to be right, even before a king. She sought wise counsel and was rewarded with a throne. His words were interrupted by a violent round of coughing that sent Gwen rushing to his side. You've always listened to me and done what I told you, her father said, once the coughing ceased. Listen to me, one last time. Go to Colorado. Marry James Barber. He'll do right by you. I'm sure of it. Tears made dark stains on her green skirt as Gwen began to weep. How can you be sure? She asked. Because that's what I prayed for. Say you'll do it when I'm gone. Promise me you won't let the fire inside you die. Promise me that you'll keep on living long after today. Long after this chapter in your life. Promise me. I promise, Gwen blubbered as tears shook her. I promise. Live a good life, Gwenny. I'll be waiting for you in paradise. Her father gasped and then was still. Gwen waited to hear more. Nothing came. She reached for his hand and squeezed it, but he didn't respond. Her body quaked, but she didn't have the courage to lift her eyes to confirm what she already knew. He was gone. Jasper, she said, at first too quietly to be heard. Jasper, she yelled as she ran from the bed to the door. She yelled until he appeared. What is it, Gwenny? He asked in a rush, concern etched into his features. She couldn't speak. She could only point behind her to where her father lay. Jasper's expression fell as he realized what she meant. He walked toward her slowly, and then slipped around her through the door and approached her father's bedside. May he rest in peace, Jasper said solemnly. The moment the words hit her ears, Gwen's knees gave way and she began to crumple to the floor. Jasper must have seen her start to wobble, because within a second, he was there to cushion her fall as wails began to spill from her lips. Let it out, Jasper soothed as she gripped his shirt and sobbed into his chest. The hurt was so much she didn't think she could bear it. It was as if someone had shot her right through her middle, leaving a gaping hole. No matter how much she cried and moaned, she couldn't get the hole to close. It only grew, threatening to swallow her entirely. You hold on to me, Jasper said. She could hear the pain in his voice as he held her. I've got ya. I'll take care of everything, Gwenny. You just let it out. Daddy, she wailed like a child. She was an orphan now. Though she was 22, she felt more like 5 as the realization set in. Her father was gone. There would be no more walks in the field. No more laughter over card games. No more reading the Bible to one another on Sunday afternoons. No more direction from the wisest man she'd ever met. She was going to have to make her own choices now. She was going to have to rely on God and herself to get by. She didn't know how she was going to do that, and right then, she didn't want to think about it. She just wanted her father to wake up. Like Lazarus, she wanted him to get up and come out from the shadow of death and be with her again, but he wouldn't. God hadn't answered her prayer to save him. He wasn't going to answer her silly wish either. God's ways were perfect, even if she didn't understand them. Her father's words echoed in the recesses of her mind, only making her cry harder. She'd never doubted her father in life. She couldn't doubt him in death. All she could do was weep at the chapter of her life that had just closed, never to be opened again. The chapter where she was a dutiful daughter to a loving father. The chapter where she was safe and life made sense. Only God knew what waited ahead of her. Chapter 5. He still couldn't believe she was there. After his proposal, James had waited months for a reply. He had been sure he'd scared her off, that her affection toward him hadn't been true when finally, another letter arrived. Honestly, his own boldness had taken him by surprise when he'd written the words asking her to marry him. It wasn't until he'd sat to write her again that he realized that after months of correspondence, he felt for her the way he'd never felt for another. Then he'd learned of her father's death, and the urge to protect her grew even stronger. He'd written again, repeating his request for her hand. The day the letter arrived with her acceptance was the best day of his life. She wanted to marry him. Not someone bland and timid, but a woman who was bold and had courage that he'd never seen before. Though in the weeks since her arrival, he was beginning to wonder if all that boldness was necessarily a good thing. When Gwendolyn first arrived, she'd been quiet, which under the circumstances wasn't entirely strange. She'd lost her father, sold her ranch, and moved hundreds of miles from her home to marry a man she'd never met in person. It was enough to make anyone nervous and reticent. But it hadn't lasted long. Once she'd gotten used to the place, a person could hardly keep her indoors. "She's wild," Hamilton repeated as they checked their horses for the morning's ride to take the herd to pasture. James couldn't remember how many times Hamilton had said it since Gwendolyn arrived, but he was getting pretty tired of hearing it. "So what if she isn't genteel?" "I like it." Hamilton scoffed. "You don't know what you're saying. A woman like that could never make a proper wife. You'll be spending all your days trying to find her, instead of her being at home keeping house." "What makes you so knowledgeable about women?" James retorted. "I don't see your wife running around here anywhere." Hamilton's jaw tensed. "I think after all the years, I know a bit more about women than you do," he stated as he stalked away. "I highly doubt that," James responded. "Seems to me the only one in this family who knows anything about wives is the one who actually has one, but he's no longer here." If anything was sure to get Hamilton's attention, it was referring to Simeon, a fact well known to James but one he completely disregarded in that moment. Hamilton thought he knew a lot, but history was the best judge, and if it had anything to say, Hamilton didn't know what he was talking about on many things. "I told you not to talk about him," Hamilton growled low in his throat as he turned to face James. "I didn't. I just said the one who doesn't live here anymore." "If I wanted to say Simeon, I would have said it," he snapped. Hamilton tensed further. "His name is not to be mentioned in my house. He's no longer welcome here." James shook his head. "Why? Because he dared to defy you?" "Hamilton, Simeon's a grown man. He can make his own decisions, and so can I." With that, he discarded the reins he'd been gripping and walked away. Hamilton could take the herd out on his own. He had something better to do. "What the world's gotten into you?" Hamilton called to his back as James continued his march back to the house. James didn't look back as he heard his brother continue. "It's her. Since she got here, you've been different and you know it. She's changing ya and not for the better." James slammed the door to the house. He was halfway up the stairs when he noticed Gwen sitting in the large armchair that backed the door. He stopped, dumbfounded. In the light that fell on her, she was stunning. Gwendolyn was a beauty in any man's eyes. James was sure that even Hamilton couldn't disagree with that. She was tall, unlike most women he knew, but he liked that about her. She could look him straight in the eye. Her skin was alabaster with a splattering of tiny freckles across her nose and cheeks. The corners of her mouth were slightly upturned as if she were constantly amused. Then there were her eyes. It wasn't so much the color that drew him, but how bright they were. They seemed to have their own radiance, but he was sure he was being ridiculous. Maybe it was because of how he felt when he looked into them. "Did you hear all that?" he questioned, once he'd regained his focus. "Yes," she stated flatly as she raised her eyes to him. He was yelling. "So were you. Hamilton doesn't like me. He doesn't know ya. He seems to think he does." She sighed and got to her feet. "Look, James, I didn't come here to be a burden or to tear two brothers apart. We aren't married yet. I can go home. I'll manage just fine on my own." His feet were moving from the moment the word home left her mouth. The next second, he was standing right in front of her. "You don't have to do that," he stated as he reached out to touch her arm. She looked at where his hand rested on her arm, and then her eyes returned to him. They were like the eyes of a doe, large and innocent, trying to decide whether to stay or run. He reached his other hand to her arm and held it, just in case her choice was the latter. "Really, don't even think about that. Hamilton's just frustrated is all. He thinks everything should be as he wants. He thinks he knows everything because he's the eldest," James explained. "Who's Simeon?" she asked. "You heard that, too?" "I heard everything." Simeon was a long story, one that didn't paint his eldest brother in the best of lights. If Gwendolyn doubted her decision, telling her the truth about Simeon might only make her think that leaving was for the better. It was hard to explain Hamilton to people who knew him, far less those who didn't. Hamilton wasn't as bad as he came off. He was just stuck, unwilling to change, and terrified every time the winds of change came. And no matter what he claimed, Hamilton missed Simeon. James knew it. Hamilton just couldn't admit it to himself or anyone else. "Well?" she asked when he dawdled in his reply. "Right. Sorry. Simeon." He exhaled a long breath and flashed his best smile. "That's a story best told by horseback," he stated. "Besides, you could use some time outside." He watched the confusion ripple across her face. Gwendolyn had spent most days outside, just not with him. James aimed to change that. "Trust me," he stated as he let his hand slide down her arm to grip her fingers. Again she watched the action with trepidation, but as he moved toward the door she didn't protest. She followed him willingly out of the house and to the barn. James had gotten a horse just for Gwendolyn after she told him of her Bonnie, whom she'd had to sell before leaving Texas. Comet was no sweet mount, but James had been sure the two would get along just fine, and they had. Gwendolyn knew the horse better than she knew anyone else on the ranch. They'd spent more time together in the field than James had with her, and like Gwendolyn, he felt his best on the back of a horse out in the field. It was time she knew him better, because there was so much in her eyes he wanted to know for himself. Chapter 6. The plain lay open before them, as James and Gwen took to their horses. They weren't chasing the horizon, they were meandering toward it, knowing it would never be within their grasp, yet somehow that made it all the more enjoyable. "You said you'd tell me," Gwen interrupted the silence that had gone on for the half an hour they'd been on the plain. "I did. Didn't I?" James began as he turned toward her. "And I always keep my word." He was just like she'd imagined. Everything she'd read in his letters. Gwen couldn't believe it at first. It was as if her father's words had proven true yet again. She'd watched him out the corner of her eye for some time since they'd left the ranch. She'd never really had an appreciation for a man on a horse before, but none had ever looked the way James did. He sat with his back erect, though it wasn't forced. He folded his arms in a casual way over his pommel as they rode. His chestnut hair blew gently in the breeze, the front just a tad longer than it should be but neatly cut. It was almost as if fingers were playing in it. Unlike Hamilton, James had the beginnings of beard from not shaving recently, but there was something about it that Gwen liked. It gave his face a rugged look and couldn't hide the cleft in his chin, and there was no denying the depth of his brown eyes. They were like the brilliant bay coloring of a healthy horse's coat. She was mesmerized. It was that thought that had caused her to speak. Her mind needed the distraction. "You said you keep your word, so tell me. Tell me about Simeon," she insisted. James seemed to hesitate and then began to tell her one of the saddest things she'd ever heard. How could Hamilton have treated that young woman in such way just because of her Indian heritage? How could he have disowned a brother who had shown more compassion and care than anyone else in the situation? She couldn't understand. "And what do you think?" she asked, once James had finished his story. "I think Simeon had to find his own path," he answered. "And I think he took the right one. So why not tell your brother that? Let him know you stand by Simeon." "Because it isn't that simple," James stated. "You don't know Hamilton. You don't know what he had to give up to be there for us, or why he thinks the way he does. He can't help it. It's the way he was brought up. Weren't you and Simeon brought up the same?" "No, not really. Hamilton was the one our father went to. He was the oldest, the one who was going to take over everything one day, so our father took to training him the way he wanted him to be. Our father had a prejudice against Indians. He'd been a soldier and lost more than one friend to fighting with them. To my father, there was no good Indian but a dead one. He hammered that into Hamilton's head so hard. I don't think Hamilton would have even known how to think differently. But you aren't like that." "No. Simeon and I had our mother, and she was a God-fearing woman who saw all people as equals. Our father, however, didn't care too much about what God had to say about it. He was more concerned with shaping Hamilton the way he wanted, than to consider what the Lord had to say. He used the word of God on Hamilton like a tool, fashioning him to think in ways so contradictory, it was hard to watch. I know it was hard for our mother. She must have hated seeing her son turn out that way. She did. It broke her heart, but it made her even more determined to see to it that we didn't end up the same way. It worked." "So why do you stay?" she questioned. "Because I believe with the right help and the right opportunity, my brother can change. At least I pray for it," James confessed. Gwen could tell the conversation was difficult for James. It couldn't be easy to admit his brother was such a man, or that his father had been worse. There was only one way she could think of to remedy it. "Race you?" she said with a grin. Before he had a chance to dig his heels into his stallion and take off after her, she'd kicked her heels into the flanks of her horse. Exhilaration filled her as the animal sprang to life. One moment James was beside her, and the next, he was somewhere in the distance behind her. A laugh leapt from her lips as the wind whipped through her hair. She yelled her pleasure as she raced James toward the horizon. Suddenly a laugh she'd never heard before rose from behind her. It was James. She looked over her shoulder to find he'd gained ground on her. He was a better rider than she'd thought, but Gwen wasn't about to be beaten. She kicked her horse again, and Comet increased his speed. Gwen looked over her shoulder in delight as she darted before him. Despite her efforts, James was proving the better horseman as he quickly caught up to her. A moment later, he was beside her. She looked at James, and he looked at her as they raced. The wind had completely swept his hair back, and the light in his eye was something Gwen recognized and felt herself: excitement. Her heart swelled at the sight of it. He really wasn't a man who wanted a tame wife to only cook, clean, and keep house. He genuinely liked her fire and adventurousness. He was her match. The plane dipped down toward a creek and Gwen and James didn't falter as their horses picked up speed. It was a lush, vibrant green and the pink flowers that flew by in a haze were scattered about rocky patches. James jumped one or two of them and Gwen did the same in their little game. Her mind was so solely on the pleasure of having someone beside her, a man who seemed to understand her and didn't want to change her, that her ears failed to pick up on the danger lurking nearby, but her horse certainly did. Suddenly, Comet reared up with a loud snort, his front legs high in the air. "Whoa!" Gwen cried, but the terrified animal was too alarmed to hear her as his front legs smashed to the ground and then reared again. Gwen caught the sound for only a second, a rattle somewhere to her left. A snake. Panic gripped her as Comet once again showed his alarm. Then they were falling. There was no way to stop it. Gwen barely turned to see the ground rushing up to meet her as she raised her hands to protect her head. She and the 1,300-pound animal toppled. The sound of James yelling her name was the last word she heard before darkness took her. Chapter 7. I warned you something like this would happen, Hamilton repeated as he hovered nearby. I told you she was wild. I know you did, James hollered, taking his brother by surprise and causing Doc Parsons to jump. Sorry, document. If you boys aren't going to help, I suggest you get out of here and let me tend to my patient, the aged doctor instructed sternly. Doc Parsons wasn't a man who minced words. He was as straight as they came and highly skilled. He was the best doctor around for miles, and it was sheer luck that he'd been in town. If she dies, Hamilton began, and the words sent a chill through James's heart. Shut your mouth, he raged. That's it. Both of you, out, the doctor ordered with a finger pointing to the door. She doesn't need your yapping. Doc, James began but was quickly silenced. I said, out. James walked angrily from the room with Hamilton right behind him. The door had barely closed on their exit before he turned on his brother. What do you think you were saying in there? He barked. Talking about death while she's lying there like that? I was being realistic, Hamilton retorted. Something you should try. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been running around in a dream world since you met that woman. All this talk about life and adventure, and look where it's got you. She isn't fit to be a wife. She's more a man than a lady. Watch your tongue, James growled. She may not be some timid flower, but she certainly ain't no man, and I'm getting really sick of hearing you speak ill of her. I speak the truth, and you know it, Hamilton argued as he poked a finger in his brother's chest. James glared at it as anger rose up inside him. I'd get that finger out my chest if I were you, he replied coldly. What? You going to fight me now? See what she's doing to you? She's making you into someone you're not. You hardly seem my brother any longer, Hamilton stated, his tone softening. What's happening to you? James's jaw clenched. He wanted to hit something, and before that feeling unleashed on his brother, he left. Grabbing his jacket, he stormed from the house, slamming the door behind him. It was dark out. The hours had flown by since the accident. James's hadn't even realized when the sun had set, not that he cared now. He stalked to the barn where his horse was stabled. He untethered him and slapped a saddle on, belting it in place before immediately swinging a leg up and over the animal's back and tearing from the barn. James raced into the night, to the very creek where he and Gwen had been. Once there, he jumped from the saddle and began to vent his anger to the heavens as he yelled and kicked the ground in frustration. He was angry, but it wasn't with Hamilton, though he did deserve a tongue lashing for his callous words. He was angry with himself. It was his fault that Gwen had gotten hurt. He should never have encouraged her. Hamilton had been right, he wasn't acting like himself. It was because of her, she made him feel things he'd never allowed himself to feel. She made him want to be more than he'd ever been, and that careless notion could wind up losing him the woman he cared about most. Lord, he cried into the night, help me. What the world am I doing? He sank to his haunches, his head in his hands. If she dies, it's my fault. How could he think he could be responsible for a family when he becomes so irresponsible in a matter of weeks? Irresponsibility that had already led to unthinkable and maybe permanent consequences. Maybe he had made a mistake in trying to prove that he could be more than what others thought of him. Maybe, Hamilton was right. Maybe, Gwen was too much. Doc Parsons was still cloistered in Simeon's old room by the time James returned. Gwen had been staying in the cottage, but there was barely any room there to tend someone who was ill, far less injured. In a snap decision, James had decided she'd be better off in the main house with him and Hamilton. His brother was nowhere to be found, but the sound of shuffling above let him know Hamilton had retreated to his room. He was thankful for that. He had some apologizing to do, and he wasn't yet ready to swallow that bitter pill. Instead, he sat in the armchair he'd found Gwen in earlier that day and waited. It was a long time before Doc Parson emerged, but James never took his eyes from the door, not even as fatigue tugged at his eyelids. The moment he saw the doc, he sprang to his feet. "How is she, Doc?" "She took quite a spill," the doctor began. He sounded tired. "Take a seat." "You've been in there for hours," James insisted. "Let me get you some water." He rushed into the kitchen and poured a mug of water before rushing back. Doc Parsons was now seated in the comfortable chair, and James gave him the water before taking a seat across from him. He leaned on his elbows as he waited for the doctor to explain. Doc Parsons drank down his water in a rush and sighed. "I needed that." "I'm sure you did," James agreed. "As I was saying, Gwen took a nasty spill. Her head isn't that bad. She'll have a headache for a few days, but it's her leg I'm worried about. The horse landed full on that right leg, broke it in 4 places. Took me hours just to set it right. Thankfully, I had the tools to do surgery." "Surgery?" James asked, alarmed. "A small one. One of the bones had punctured through the skin. She's going to have a scar up her thigh, but it'll be straight, I assure you. Hamilton assisted me in setting the other breaks. Took us some time. Would have helped if you were here," he said gravely over the top of his spectacles. "She was in a mighty lot of pain once we started, but I gave her some chloroform to help put her out again." Guilt weighed on James's shoulders. He should have stayed. He should have been there when Gwen had needed him. Another example of how unprepared and irresponsible he was. James dug his nails into the palms of his hands as he continued to listen. The doctor looked at James squarely. "She's going to need a lot of help going forward. She may have a limp for the rest of her life. How bad, I can't tell at this point. She's going to need a lot of assistance, at least in the beginning." "I understand, document. I don't know what's going on here, or who this young lady is to you, but I do know that if you aren't prepared to be there for her, you'd better let her know sooner rather than later. A lady's heart is a fragile thing, and given the condition she's going to be in when she wakes up, it's best you know your intentions and make them plain." The doctor got to his feet. "It wouldn't be fair to let her believe something's going to happen when it ain't." James walked the doctor out, his words reverberating in his mind. He didn't hesitate once the door was closed. He turned and walked toward the bedroom where Gwen lay recovering and slipped inside. A single lamp lit the room from where it sat on a small table in the corner. Bloody rags decorated the rest of it. Never a squeamish man, the sight made James's stomach roil as he thought that Gwen had been there alone through all of that, while he'd run off to throw a tantrum like a child. He sat in the empty chair the doctor had left behind. She was pale. Beads of sweat dampened her brow, and she lay completely still. Despite it all, she was still lovely. He leaned in beside her, resting on his elbows as he took her hand in his and began to pray. "Lord, please heal her." Chapter 8. She had never known pain like this in her life. Tears were streaming down her face long before her eyes opened for the first time after the accident. Gwen's head was pounding, but it was eclipsed by the searing pain that radiating from her leg and seemed to extend throughout her body. There was no position that made it better. Every movement, no matter how slight, sent stinging shocks through her. The doctor came to check on her, though she barely remembered his visits. The pain was so great that he often administered something to make her sleep. The only thing she knew for sure was that James was always there. Gwen appreciated his care, especially in the first days when the pain was the worst, but as the days and weeks drew on, she began to realize that something had changed. It was there, in his eyes. The light she used to see when he looked at her had disappeared. His touch, which once seemed to hold something more, now seemed like that of any caregiver toward a patient. Was it her leg that was the cause of the change? The doctor had delivered the dire prospects days after the pain became bearable. He said her days of riding were more than likely over. She wouldn't believe it. She'd ride again. She was sure of it. She was going to have a scar, but she accepted that, though she hadn't reconciled with having a limp for the rest of her days. 5 weeks Gwen lay in bed until she was able to bear her own weight. Doc Parsons brought her a cane which helped her get around on her own. The better she got, however, the more James seemed to find other things to occupy himself. Nothing had been said about their impending marriage, and Gwen was beginning to doubt there was going to be one. "Where do you think you're going?" Hamilton asked as Gwen shuffled from her room one afternoon. "Just going to take a walk around the ranch," she said. "Get some fresh air." He looked at her skeptically. "Keep away from around the corral. James is breaking in a new stallion and that thing's as ornery as a rattlesnake," he continued, and then set his eyes squarely on her. "He doesn't need any distractions." Was that what she was? A distraction? "I'll stay out of his way." "Thank you, Hamilton," she answered softly before going on her way. The sun was high, and the breeze warm as Gwen stepped out onto the porch. She negotiated the step down and then directed her path toward the south, away from the house. It was a slow pace, one she was still getting accustomed to, but at least the stiffness and discomfort had lessened significantly. Though the doctor said she'd limp, there wasn't much of one to speak of. Sometimes, Gwen believed it was just the stiffness that was the trouble, and after moving around for a while, that too began to disappear. There was a thicket of bluebells near the trees to the south. Gwen had discovered them before the accident, and it was the thought of those little purple and blue flowers that drew her now. She prayed as she walked, asking God why this had happened when everything seemed to be going well. What had taken James's heart from her, and would it ever return? She sighed, hoping for an answer, but there was none. "I trust you," she said as she looked up through the trees at the sunlight filtering through. "Who are you talking to?" said a voice from behind her. "James." "You scared me," she said as her heart galloped in her chest. "I didn't hear you following me." "I'm sorry. I saw you walking and didn't think it was safe for you to be on your own." "I'm fine," Gwen answered. "You needn't have troubled yourself. Hamilton told me you were busy." "Busy?" "Breaking in that new stallion," she answered. James laughed. "That horse was a kitten. Took me no time at all." He had such a lovely laugh. Gwen couldn't help but smile when she heard it. "I'm glad," she stated nervously. James was looking at her so intently, it made her stomach flip. "I know getting around is a bit harder for you now, so I fixed up a small wagon that should help you. I put in a little drop-down step that you fold away to make it easier to get up and down. I can hitch it up any time you want to go somewhere that's a bit far to walk." "That was nice of you," she said with a small smile. "I just thought it would be better for when you need to go do things for yourself." "I won't always be here," he explained. Gwen's heart faltered. Do things for herself? Not always be there? Did that mean he was sending her away? She couldn't bring herself to ask, at least not yet. "Very kind of you." "Gwen, there's something we need to talk about," James began, his eyes searching the grass near her feet. Immediately Gwen's stomach felt sick. Here it was. The words she feared to hear. "Yes, James," she said with a shaky breath as his eyes returned to hers. He said nothing. Instead, he looked at her, conflict in his eyes. He had something to say, but it wasn't easy for him to do, that much was clear. Gwen could only think of one thing that could make James so nervous. It wasn't easy telling a woman with a cane that the wedding she'd come for was off. It wasn't easy to tell someone that what had started between them would never finish. That a life together was no longer an option. She'd make it easy for him. "I wanted to talk to you, too," she started. "I was trying to find the right time." "What about us?" James grew very still at the word as if somehow those two little letters were something dangerous. "I don't think that this is going to work out," she began and almost choked on the words. "I see. This isn't what I thought it was going to be," she continued, as she tried to find excuses in her mind. "I like my freedom. I like walking on my own and doing what I want," she continued. James remained silent. She had to find something else, the words sounded weak even as she said them. Besides, I could never live here. Your brother hates me. I couldn't live in a house with a man who feels that way toward me, even if he is your brother. And I know this isn't what you want, either, she said, looking down at her leg. I just don't think we should force this. James stepped toward her, closing the gap between them in 3 strides. I said I'd marry you. That's why you came here. That's why you gave up your entire life, he began, but she interrupted him. Gwen didn't want his guilt. She didn't want him to marry her because he felt obliged because of the promises he'd made months before. Things were different now. She was different, and she could understand how that may have changed his feelings. She couldn't blame him. It was her carelessness that had led to all of this. She should have held on to her horse and gotten him under control. It was her fault. She could at least spare James the difficulty of ending it. I don't want to marry you, she stated. James's face slackened. You don't? No. I don't, she lied, the words more convincing than her excuses. We just don't fit. I'd hoped we would, but we don't. I'm too wild, she stated, using Hamilton's favorite word to describe her. And I'm too passive? James questioned with an edge in his tone. You weren't ready for a woman like me. I think you thought you were, but you aren't. Not many men are. I'm a handful, she admitted. James's jaw tensed. She could tell her words had struck a nerve. I'm really sorry. I was feeling the same thing myself, he replied. Gwen's heart sank, but she did her best to hide it. I better be getting back to the house. You should be fine out here, James continued, before turning and walking away. Gwen held her head up as she watched him. He didn't look back, and when he was finally gone from sight, she wept. God's plans are perfect. The words returned to her mind as she cried alone amongst the trees. God's plans are perfect, she agreed, even as the tears rolled down her cheeks. Some things were just beyond her understanding. And this was one of them. Chapter 9. Gwen didn't want to marry him. Why would she? He'd turned out to be the worst kind of man to be a husband. He'd done everything wrong, and she'd gotten hurt because of it. The knowledge didn't make it easier to handle, so James did what he did best. He kept quiet. In the days since Gwen's confession, James had avoided her as much as possible. Hamilton was pleased to hear that the wedding wouldn't be happening. He was still of the view that Gwen could never make a good wife, but James knew he was wrong. She'd make a wonderful wife. She already knew how to run a household from years of being the only woman in her father's home. It was him who wasn't ready to be a husband. Since the accident, he had become more and more convinced of that fact. She'd told him they weren't a fit, and she was right. I'm headed out, James called over his shoulder as he mounted his horse. Where are you headed? Hamilton asked as he wound a length of rope around his arm. Going to take a ride through the old trails, James stated. It's been a while since I took a look around. That lady of yours went in the same direction early this morning. The news took James by surprise. She did? You let her go by herself? I'm not her keeper. She can take care of herself. Besides, she'll be leaving here in a short while. The sooner she gets to do things on her own the better. No one else is gonna do them for her. Hamilton's words made James's heart cold. They were true. Gwen wasn't exactly the type of woman most men flocked to, and now with her cane and that scar, and at her age, spinsterhood seemed almost a guarantee. I'll see you later, he said to Hamilton and set off. The trail hadn't changed since before he was a boy. It was the same trail that James's father had taken them all on when they were young. James stayed on his horse, but eventually, the urge to walk the path that held so many memories, won out. The trail was one that led up the mountains a few miles away. It was overgrown with trees and brush. On occasion, elk passed through the area. James and his brother had enjoyed elk hunting with their father as boys, though they rarely shot anything. Their mother didn't appreciate having to deal with carcasses, so mostly their father used it as practice for them as they learned to aim and follow a prey with their gun. They had been good days. The afternoon seemed to rush by and soon the light was waning. It was time to head back. Swinging his leg over the saddle, he pulled himself up and turned the horse in the direction of home. James weaved his horse through the brush, but he wanted to stop at the creek that flowed nearby. He hadn't been there in years, and at the right time, a person could find fish heading upstream. He wouldn't have minded a little fishing to change the pace. The peaceful sport was something that could help take his mind off of the fact that Gwen was leaving. James emerged from the brush, the creek rolling before him just as he remembered. The sight elicited a smile, but that soon faded as his eyes drifted northward. Gwen. She was standing by the water, her cane in her hand. James looked around, but there was no sign of the wagon and horse. Had she left them somewhere? Why? He shook his head. She did like to do her own thing. He couldn't imagine her ever letting anything or anyone stop her, not even a bum leg. It made him smile. Then a glimpse of something in the trees made him stop. James wasn't sure he'd seen it at first, a flash of golden brown fur, but a second later there it was heading in Gwen's direction. Usually, wild animals stayed away from humans, but that wasn't always the case. It was dusk, the time of day when they hunted. Mountain lions. Nocturnal creatures, they roamed the area when the sun began to set and well into the night, as they stalked their prey. This one was old, by the coloring of its coat, but there was no doubt that the hunger and thirst in its belly had drawn it to the water. Injured, Gwen was easy prey for the hungry cat that was much larger than her and equipped with claws and teeth. She would be far easier than an agile deer. Gwen, he called urgently, trying to get her attention. Clearly, she hadn't seen the animal, and it was closing in quickly. Any moment it would strike. She heard his voice, her head turning in his direction, but it was too late. The cat had cleared the trees and was bounding toward her. James had to act fast. Reaching to his hip, James grabbed his revolver and kicked his heels hard into his horse's side, taking aim as the animal began to race in Gwen's direction. He didn't dare look at her. He couldn't risk taking his eye away as he focused his sights. If he missed, the cat would get her and it could do more than enough to harm her in the time it would take him to aim again. He had to be sure before he pulled the trigger. Gwen couldn't afford for him to make a mistake. Steady. Line up. Fire. The crack of the gun echoed off the surrounding rocks as the mountain lion sprang and then fell upon Gwen. James flew from the saddle the minute his horse was close enough. Then he was running. Gwen, he yelled. He reached her side and hoisted the dead animal off of her with strength he didn't know he had. She lay there stunned and staring at him as he pulled her into his arms. Are you all right? Did it hurt you? He asked in a rush as he proceeded to inspect every bit of her he could see. His hands slid over her arms and up to her neck and face, and he turned it from side to side to make sure there was no injury. Gwen didn't speak, she just sat there shaking. Say something? James insisted when she didn't answer. Trembling, she looked at him, and he saw the glisten in her eyes as tears began to fall. She was fine, just in shock. He clutched her to his chest and sighed a deep breath of relief. It's all right. You're fine now, he repeated as he sat on the earth beside her and began to rock her soothingly. Gwen's silence had been replaced by sobs as her shock melted into reality at what had almost happened. I got you, he insisted. I'm not letting you go. He wasn't. Ever. I'm never letting you go, he stated firmly. You hear me, Gwen? I'm never letting you go. I love you, and I'm not gonna lose you. He clutched her. The moment the words were spoken, he felt her arms that were wound around his waist in fear tighten. Reluctantly, he loosened his grip to look at her. Her lips quivered. I thought you wanted me to leave, she said. No. Why would you ever think that? He asked. That day in the thicket. You said. He was a fool. Of course, she'd believed he wanted to end it. No. I wanted to be sure you still wanted to marry me. But you were so busy all the time once I got better. I thought you didn't want to be around me, she continued. That wasn't it, he explained. I was trying to make things better for you. I was working on the wagon, and I was feeling like a heel. Why? She asked, her cheeks tear-stained. Because it was my fault that you got hurt. I encouraged you that day, and after the accident, when Doc Parsons needed my help, I wasn't there. He stroked her cheek with his thumb to wipe her tears away. I thought you were too much for me. I thought I couldn't be strong enough for a woman like you. He gave a small laugh. Even with a cane, you didn't need me to get around. I wanted you to be there, she said softly. And you were at first, but then, it was like you didn't want to be anymore. I didn't think you needed me. You're like no woman I've ever known. I wasn't sure what was right from what wasn't. You always said you were strong and didn't like anyone coddling you. I didn't want to push myself on you, so I gave you space and did what I could to make things easy for you. She shook her head. You could never push yourself on me, she insisted. I wanted you there. I like you taking care of me, she admitted, and James knew the significance of her words. He flashed a grin. You mean that? I never thought anyone could love a woman like me. Everyone always found fault with me. You were the first man who didn't. Then after the accident, I felt as if you were pulling away, so I did what I could to make it easier for you and me. I lied. He frowned. I said I didn't want to marry you, but I do. I really do, she insisted. I love you, James. He didn't know what came over him. One moment he was calm, listening to Gwen speak, the next his lips were on hers. It was a sheer delight when she returned his kiss. Be mine? He asked breathlessly when they finally parted. She nodded so urgently it made him laugh. Chapter 10. The sun was dipping low on the horizon as Gwen and James stood before Reverend Dixon. The witnesses were few: Simeon, his wife Hialeah, her mother Immokalee, and the Reverend's wife Mildred. The moment Gwen met Simeon and Hialeah, she'd taken to them immediately. Simeon was everything James had described, and Hialeah was even more so. The two women talked about their very different and yet similar backgrounds. They both knew what it was to grow up under constant scrutiny for who they were and for nothing they'd done wrong. Gwen had never had a female friend, but she was sure Hialeah was now her first, which was why she'd asked her to stand up with her. That being the case, it was only fitting for Simeon to do the same for James. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Hidden Creek, and the small town was busy carrying out their usual daily activities, completely unaware of what a special day this was. Those gathered near the edge of the creek which had given the town its name, knew better, and for Gwen, it was the most magical day there would ever be. We stand witness, Simeon and Hialeah said together as the Reverend questioned them before proceeding with the ceremony. Gwen's leg twinged under the strain of standing unaided. She'd refused to use her cane on such a day, and the pain was shoved into the background as she and James exchanged their vows. She was sure everyone could hear her heart as it danced in her chest, but she didn't care. The smile on her face told the story of her joy. She was marrying the man she loved, something she never dreamed would happen. Her father would have been so happy. Gwen had thought a lot about her father in the days since James had proposed again. Her father had told her the man who'd see her value would find her, and he had. How had her father known? Then she remembered, her father had prayed for it. The thought brought tears to her eyes and praise to her lips as she thanked him for his prayers. She would never have made such a prayer for herself. She had resigned herself to her fate of being single long before, but her father hadn't. He had stubbornly believed there was someone for her. He had believed there was love waiting for her when she couldn't find it herself and didn't dare to dream of it. She thanked God for her praying father. God had answered his prayer. A giggle escaped her lips, and James pressed his mouth to hers the moment the Reverend declared them man and wife. James's eagerness was endearing, as was his heart. She knew the day, while bringing him joy, was also a day of some sadness. Hamilton had refused to attend the ceremony. James and his brother had heatedly parted ways the day James announced his intention to marry her. James had offered to stay on and continue to work the ranch with him while they set up the house, but Hamilton had refused. It pained James, but he refused to change his mind, though he said he understood his brother's reaction. Gwen couldn't, but she didn't press the issue. Looking into her husband's eyes as he looked into hers, Gwen had never felt so completely accepted. "I love you," she said softly. He grinned. "You better. You've got a long life ahead with me." He swept her into his arms once more, much to the joyful hooting of her new brother-in-law. Somewhere in the distance, a horse snorted, but Gwen was nearly too preoccupied to notice. When her husband finally returned her to the earth, and she was able to catch her breath, she found Simeon and Hialeah's gazes were averted. Instantly, Gwen saw why. Hamilton. There he was, sitting on his horse just west of them. Gwen was sure it was him, though the lengthening shadows kept the rider's face from view. It was only a moment, a lingering look before the rider tugged on the reins and set the horse off in the opposite direction. She looked at James. He was watching the figure, a smile on his face. She squeezed his hand. "Told you." "I know my brother," he said sadly, then planted a tender kiss on her cheek. "Let's go home." One moment her feet were on the ground, the next they were high in the air as James swept her up into his arms. She squealed in surprise and flung her arms around his neck. "James." "What? Don't I have the right to carry my bride?" he questioned as he strode toward their waiting wagon. "Wife." She loved the sound of it. Gwen nestled her head against James's neck. "Lead on, husband," she murmured. The sun was gone as James kicked the door open to their new home. Gwen laughed. He kicked it closed again once they were inside. They'd gotten a small place in town, nothing much, but good enough for a start. "You better be careful with that door," Gwen warned. "You're the one who'll have to repair it if you break it." "That's all right. I don't mind fixing anything in our house," James replied as he set her down. She looked up at him with a grin. "Our house." "Ours for now, but someday soon I'm going to build you your very own house." "On our own ranch," James promised as he looked into her eyes, a subtle current building between them. Gwen swallowed a nervous lump in her throat as he leaned closer. Every kiss was better than the one before. She stepped closer and winced slightly. It caught James's attention. "It hurts?" he asked, moving his hand to her thigh. Gwen nodded as nervousness stole her tongue. James's eyes burned into hers. "Let's get you off your feet." He led her to the bed they were now to share and sat her down on the end. He knelt at her feet, looking up at her. "I know you're nervous," James began, as he started to unlace her shoes. Gwen's heart thundered in her chest, her tongue still captive behind her teeth. "So am I," he continued as he removed one shoe and then the other. Her stockings went next. "I won't hurt you," he said, still crouched before her. "I know," she answered, finally finding her voice. "I love you, Gwendolyn Barber." She smiled. "I love you, James Barber." A delighted smile spread across her husband's lips as his face rose to meet hers. He sealed their exchange with a kiss. Gwen melted into her husband's kiss, sure of only one thing. Their paths were now one. There was nowhere he'd go that she wouldn't follow, and they would both follow the path the Lord had set before them, come what may. Gwendolyn was in love, and she was home. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.